I was excluded from every family gathering for the last 5 years. Then my son demanded that I sell my house to pay $200,000 of my greedy daughter-in-law's debts. When I refused, they broke into my home with baseball bats and destroyed everything, leaving $50,000 in damages, until they discovered I had moved out months ago. That's when 8 police officers showed up, and I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Rosalind. I'm 62 years old, and for the last 5 years, I've been a ghost in my own family. It didn't happen overnight. The exclusion was gradual, so subtle that for months I convinced myself I was imagining things. It started with small changes. Lance would call less frequently, and when he did, conversations felt rushed, distracted. Then came the excuses about family gatherings. The first time I wasn't invited to Thanksgiving, Lance called 2 days after to apologize. "Mom, there just wasn't enough space at Kira's parents' house. You understand, right? Next year, we'll definitely include you." I believed him. I spent that Thanksgiving alone, heating up a frozen dinner and telling myself that next year would be different. But next year wasn't different. If anything, it got worse. Christmas came and went without an invitation. I found out about the family celebration when I called Lance on Christmas morning to wish him happy holidays. I could hear children laughing in the background, the sound of wrapping paper rustling, my own grandchildren, Emma and little Jake, voices I barely recognized anymore. "Oh, Mom," Lance said, his voice strained. "I'm sorry, we're just having a small thing here. Very intimate. You know how Kira gets stressed with too many people around." Too many people. As if I, their grandmother, was just another guest to accommodate. I hung up the phone and sat in my empty living room, surrounded by wrapped presents I had bought for grandchildren I wasn't allowed to see. The silence was deafening. I had spent 60 years building what I thought was a loving family, only to discover I was expendable. The pattern continued for months. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone was celebrated without me. I would find out about these gatherings through Facebook posts that Kira would share publicly. Photos of my grandchildren blowing out birthday candles, opening Christmas presents, laughing at Easter egg hunts. In every single photo, there was an empty space where I should have been standing. The worst part wasn't being excluded. It was the casual cruelty of it. Kira would post these photos knowing I would see them. She would tag other family members, friends, even neighbors who had been invited, but never me. It was like she was deliberately showing me my place in the family hierarchy, which was nowhere at all. I remember one particular post that broke something inside me. It was Emma's 8th birthday party, held at the local park. The photo showed at least 20 people: aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, even the mailman who had delivered a package that day and stayed for cake. Everyone was laughing, singing happy birthday to my granddaughter, and there I was, completely absent from what should have been one of the most important days in my grandchild's life. Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor, mentioned it to me the next day while we were both getting our mail. "Oh, Rosalind, I saw the photos from Emma's birthday party. What a lovely celebration. I'm surprised I didn't see you there." I forced a smile, my cheeks burning with shame. "Oh, I wasn't feeling well that day," I lied, hating myself for protecting people who clearly didn't care about protecting me. The lies became easier over time. When people asked about my family, about my grandchildren, I would make up stories about visits that never happened, phone calls that never came. It was less painful than admitting the truth, that my own son had erased me from his life so completely that I knew more about my neighbor's grandchildren than my own. But the cruelest blow came on Mother's Day 2 years ago. I had been hoping, praying that maybe this one day would be different. Surely on Mother's Day, Lance would remember that I existed, that I was the woman who had raised him, sacrificed for him, loved him unconditionally for 35 years. The day came and went in complete silence. No call, no text, no card, nothing. I spent that entire day waiting by the phone, jumping every time it rang, thinking maybe this time it would be him, but it never was. It was just telemarketers and wrong numbers, each ring a fresh reminder of my irrelevance. The next day, Kira posted a photo essay on social media titled, "Celebrating the Amazing Mothers in Our Lives." There were photos of her own mother receiving flowers, her sister being treated to brunch, her friends' mothers being honored and cherished. The caption read, "So grateful for all the wonderful maternal figures who shape our lives every day. Not one mention of me, not one photo." It was as if I had never existed, never given birth to Lance, never spent sleepless nights nursing him through fevers, never worked double shifts to pay for his college education, never been a mother at all. That night, I sat in my bedroom and looked through old photo albums, pictures of Lance as a baby, as a toddler, as a young man, pictures of me teaching him to ride a bike, helping him with homework, cheering at his baseball games. Pictures of a relationship that seemed to have been completely forgotten by everyone except me. I closed the album and made a decision that night. I stopped waiting for invitations that would never come. I stopped calling and getting voicemails that were never returned. I stopped sending gifts that were never acknowledged. I decided to protect what was left of my dignity and step back from a family that had already stepped away from me. But stepping back didn't mean I stopped caring. It didn't mean I stopped hurting. Every day, I woke up with the same hollow ache in my chest, the same sense of loss that never quite faded. I had raised a son who had become a stranger, loved grandchildren who barely knew my name, and built a family that had ultimately rejected me. What I didn't know then was that the worst was yet to come. The exclusion, as painful as it was just the beginning. Lance and Kira had bigger plans for me, plans that would test every ounce of strength I had left. And when they finally revealed their true intentions, I would discover something about myself that even I didn't know existed. The capacity to fight back. The doorbell rang on a Tuesday morning in March, sharp and insistent. I wasn't expecting anyone, hadn't been expecting anyone for months. When I opened the door, there stood Lance and Kira, both wearing expressions I had never seen before. Not quite hostile, but definitely not loving either. It was the look you might give a stranger you needed something from. "Mom," Lance said, not quite meeting my eyes, "we need to talk." I stepped aside to let them in, my heart doing that foolish little leap it always did when I saw my son. Despite everything, despite the years of silence and exclusion, part of me still hoped that maybe this visit would be different. Maybe they had come to apologize, to explain, to invite me back into their lives. I was so incredibly naive. They settled into my living room like they owned it, Kira perching on the edge of my favorite chair while Lance paced near the window. Neither of them complimented the house, asked how I was doing, or made any of the small talk that usually accompanies family visits. This wasn't a social call. "Mom, we have a situation," Lance began, his voice businesslike. "Kira has some debts that need to be handled immediately." I looked at my daughter-in-law, this woman who had slowly poisoned my relationship with my son over the years. She was staring at her manicured nails, avoiding eye contact. Her designer purse sat prominently on the coffee table, a bag that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. "What kind of debts?" I asked, though something in my stomach was already twisting with dread. Lance stopped pacing and turned to face me. "Credit cards, personal loans, some medical expenses. The total comes to about $200,000. The number hit me like a physical blow, $200,000. I had lived my entire life carefully, frugally, making sure every dollar was stretched as far as possible. $200,000 was more money than I had ever seen in one place. That's a lot of money, Lance," I managed to say. "Yes, it is," he replied curtly, "which is why we need your help." "My help?" I looked between them, confusion mixing with a growing sense of unease. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Kira finally looked up, her eyes red-rimmed as if she had been crying, though I noticed her makeup was perfectly intact. "Rosalind, I made some mistakes. Big mistakes. I got in over my head with spending, and now the creditors are threatening to take everything. Our house, Lance's business, everything we've worked for." I felt a stab of something. Not quite sympathy, but the ingrained response of a mother who had spent decades trying to fix her son's problems. Have you talked to a financial counselor? Maybe there's a payment plan you could work out, or we've tried everything, Lance interrupted. The only solution is to pay it off completely. We need you to sell the house and give us the money. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. Sell the house? Mom, you don't need all this space, Lance said, gesturing around the living room where he had once played as a child. It's way too big for one person. You could move into a nice senior living facility, something more appropriate for your age. The house should bring in enough to cover Kira's debts and still leave you with something for yourself. I stared at him, this man I had raised, trying to find any trace of the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Lance, this is my home. I've lived here for 34 years. Your father and I bought this house when you were 2 years old. He died in the bedroom upstairs. This house is just a house, Kira interrupted, her voice sharper now that the fake tears had dried up. It's not like you have anyone to leave it to anyway. The cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Not like you have anyone to leave it to. As if my own son and grandchildren didn't exist, weren't part of my life or my legacy. Lance shot Kira a warning look, but he didn't contradict her. That silence spoke volumes. I don't understand, I said slowly. You've barely spoken to me in 5 years. You've excluded me from every family gathering, every holiday, every important moment in my grandchildren's lives. And now you want me to sell my home to solve your financial problems? Family helps family, Lance said, his voice taking on a harder edge. That's what you always taught me, isn't it? That family comes first? The irony was staggering. Family comes first, coming from the son who had made me invisible to my own grandchildren. And where was this family loyalty when I was spending holidays alone? Where was it when I was excluded from Emma's birthday party? Where was it when you didn't even call me on Mother's Day? Kira stood up abruptly, her pretense of vulnerability evaporating. Oh, please. You act like we murdered someone. We just needed some space to build our own family traditions. You're so dramatic about everything. Space, I repeated quietly. 5 years of space. Look, Mom, Lance said, his patience clearly wearing thin. We didn't come here to rehash old grievances. We came here because we need help, and frankly, you're the only option we have left. What happens if I say no? The question hung between us, and I watched something shift in both their faces. Lance's jaw tightened, and Kira's eyes flashed with something that looked almost like hatred. Why would you say no? Lance asked. Unless you want to see your grandchildren homeless. There it was, the emotional blackmail I should have seen coming. The threat wrapped in concern for children I barely knew anymore. And besides, Kira added, her voice dripping with false sweetness, it's not like you're going to live forever. This way, you can help your family while you're still alive to see the good it does. I looked at these two people sitting in my living room, demanding that I sacrifice everything I had worked for to clean up their mess. I thought about the years of exclusion, the missed birthdays, the holidays spent alone. I thought about my husband, who had worked 2 jobs to pay off this house, who had dreamed of growing old here with me. I need time to think about this, I said finally. There is no time, Lance snapped. The creditors want their money now. Every day we wait, the situation gets worse. Then you should have thought about that before you spent money you didn't have, I replied, feeling a spark of anger that surprised me with its intensity. Lance's face darkened. You know what, Mom? I should have known you'd be selfish about this. You've always been selfish. Dad used to say, "Don't you dare," I said, my voice sharper than I'd heard it in years. Don't you dare bring your father into this. He would be ashamed of what you've become. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Kira gathered her purse, her movements sharp and angry. Lance stood by the door, his face flushed with rage. We'll give you a week to think about it, he said coldly. But this is happening, Mom. One way or another, this is happening. They left without another word, the door slamming behind them with a finality that seemed to echo through the empty house. I stood in my living room surrounded by 34 years of memories and realized that the family I had spent my life building was about to destroy everything I had left. What I didn't know was that I had just been given the greatest gift of my life, the gift of seeing them clearly for the first time. And once you see clearly, you can plan accordingly. 3 weeks passed after Lance and Kira's ultimatum. 3 weeks of sleepless nights, of staring at the walls of my home and wondering if I was being unreasonable. 3 weeks of second-guessing myself, of that familiar voice in my head telling me that maybe I was being selfish, maybe I should just give them what they wanted. But every time I considered it, I would remember Kira's words. It's not like you have anyone to leave it to anyway. The casual cruelty of that statement kept me grounded in reality. These people didn't love me. They saw me as a resource to be exploited, nothing more. I had an appointment with Dr. Martinez that Tuesday morning, a routine checkup that I had been putting off for months. The drive to the medical center took about 45 minutes, and the appointment itself lasted another hour. When I returned home around 2:30 in the afternoon, I knew immediately that something was wrong. The front door was standing slightly ajar. I always locked my door. Always. It was a habit ingrained in me from years of living alone. I sat in my car for a moment, staring at that partially open door, my heart beginning to pound. Maybe I had forgotten to close it properly in my rush to get to the appointment. Maybe the wind had blown it open. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation. But deep down, I knew better. I got out of my car slowly, my purse clutched tightly in my hands. As I approached the front door, I could see that the frame was splintered near the lock. Someone had forced their way in. Someone had broken into my home. I should have called the police immediately. I should have stayed in my car and dialed 911. Instead, some foolish part of me hoped that maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked. Maybe the damage was minimal. Maybe whoever had done this had taken a few valuables and left. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The sight that greeted me stole the breath from my lungs. My living room looked like a war zone. The coffee table where I had served Lance and Kira tea just weeks before was overturned, its glass top shattered into 1,000 pieces scattered across the carpet. The couch where I spent my evenings reading had been slashed open, its stuffing pulled out and thrown around the room like snow. The television was face down on the floor, its screen cracked beyond repair. But it wasn't just broken. It was methodical. This wasn't random vandalism or a robbery gone wrong. This was destruction with purpose. Destruction meant to send a message. I walked through the house in a daze, cataloging the damage room by room. In the kitchen, every dish had been swept from the cabinets and smashed on the floor. The refrigerator had been pushed over, its contents spilled across the linoleum. The walls were pocked with holes where something heavy had been swung repeatedly. Baseball bats, I realized with growing horror. The dining room was even worse. The table where I had served countless family dinners was split down the middle. The china cabinet that had belonged to my mother was completely destroyed. Generations of family heirlooms reduced to glittering fragments on the hardwood floor. Each broken piece felt like a small death, a connection to my past severed forever. But the cruelest destruction was in the hallway, where every framed photograph had been torn from the walls and systematically destroyed. Pictures of Lance as a baby, his first steps, his graduation, his wedding, all of them lay in ruins. But it was the picture of my late husband Robert that broke something inside me. It had been our last photo together, taken just a month before he passed away. Now his face stared up at me from behind a spider web of cracked glass, and I felt like I was losing him all over again. I climbed the stairs on trembling legs, afraid of what I would find but unable to stop myself from looking. The bedrooms had received the same treatment. Mattresses slashed, dressers overturned, clothes scattered everywhere. In my own bedroom, the jewelry box that Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary lay in pieces, its contents dumped carelessly on the floor. As I stood there surveying the devastation, I heard voices from outside. I looked out the window and saw Mrs. Henderson talking to Mr. Walsh from across the street, both of them gesturing toward my house. I went downstairs and stepped out onto the front porch. "Rosalind!" Mrs. Henderson hurried over, her face creased with concern. "Are you all right? We heard such a commotion earlier. I was going to call the police, but George said maybe you were just doing some renovations." "What time was this?" I asked, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "Oh, around 11:30 this morning," Mr. Walsh said. "There were several men here with baseball bats." We thought maybe you were having some work done. Demolition or something. But then we saw them leave, and the house looked. He gestured helplessly at my broken front door. Can you describe the men? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mrs. Henderson nodded vigorously. Well, one of them looked just like your Lance, dear. Same height, same walk. In fact, I was going to wave, but they seemed to be in such a hurry. My own son had done this to me. There were 3 others with him, Mr. Walsh added. Bigger men, looked like the type you might hire for moving furniture or manual labor. They all had bats, and they weren't being gentle with them. I thanked my neighbors and went back inside to survey the damage more carefully. As I picked my way through the destruction, I began to notice things that made my blood run cold. This wasn't random destruction, it was calculated. They had targeted specific items, things they knew would hurt me the most. The family photos, the china from my mother, Robert's favorite chair, the piano where I had taught Lance to play when he was 7 years old. The piano. Oh God, the piano. I hadn't even looked in the music room yet. With growing dread, I walked to the back of the house where my beloved baby grand piano sat, or had sat. Now it was a twisted wreck of wood and wire, its lid caved in, its keys scattered across the floor like broken teeth. This piano had been Robert's gift to me when Lance was born. I had played lullabies on it to soothe my baby boy to sleep. I had taught Lance his first songs on these keys, and he had destroyed it. Sitting on top of the ruined piano was an envelope with my name written on it in Lance's familiar handwriting. With shaking hands, I opened it and read the single sheet of paper inside. Mom, now you don't have a choice. Sell what's left or lose everything else too. The $200,000 isn't a request anymore. It's a debt you owe for being such a selfish mother all these years. You have 72 hours to get us the money, or next time will be worse. Don't even think about calling the police. It's your word against ours, and who's going to believe a bitter old woman over her loving family? Lance! I sank down onto the ruined piano bench, the letter trembling in my hands. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Not only had he destroyed my home, but he had the audacity to call me selfish, to blame me for forcing him to this violence. I looked around at the destruction. $50,000 in damage at least. Probably more. Everything I owned that had any sentimental value had been systematically destroyed. The house itself was still standing, but it felt like a corpse now, empty of everything that had made it home. I should have been devastated. I should have been sobbing, calling someone for help, falling apart completely. But as I sat there in the ruins of my life, something unexpected happened. I started to laugh. Not the bitter laugh of someone who had snapped, but the quiet laugh of someone who had just realized they held all the cards and their opponents didn't even know they were playing a rigged game. Lance thought he was so clever, destroying my house to force me into submission. He thought he had broken me, that I would have no choice but to give him what he wanted. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I hadn't lived in this house for 3 months. Everything they had destroyed, everything they thought would hurt me so badly I would crumble, was just stuff I had left behind when I moved to my new apartment across town. The real treasures, the family jewelry, the important documents, the photographs that actually mattered to me, were all safe in my new home. I pulled out my phone with steady hands and dialed 911. When the operator answered, my voice was calm, almost cheerful. Hello, I'd like to report a break-in and vandalism. Several men destroyed my house this morning while I was at a doctor's appointment. Yes, I can identify them. One of them was my son. As I waited for the police to arrive, I walked through the house one more time, this time with different eyes. This wasn't my devastated home anymore. This was evidence. This was proof of what Lance and Kira were really capable of when they didn't get their way. And I had been preparing for this moment for longer than they could possibly imagine. To understand what happened next, I need to take you back 6 months to a conversation I was never supposed to hear. It was a warm September evening, and I had driven to Lance and Kira's house to drop off birthday presents for Emma. Her 9th birthday was the next day, and even though I knew I wouldn't be invited to the party, I couldn't let the day pass without acknowledging it. I had bought her a beautiful set of art supplies and a book series I thought she might enjoy. When I arrived, all the lights were on downstairs, but no one answered the front door. I could hear voices coming from the backyard, so I walked around to the side gate intending to knock there instead. That's when I heard my name being mentioned, and something in the tone made me freeze. "The old bat is getting more stubborn every year," Kira was saying. "She's sitting on that house like it's some kind of shrine. Do you know what that property is worth? At least $400,000, maybe more with the right renovations." I know, Lance replied, his voice carrying that familiar note of irritation he got whenever he talked about me. "But she's not going to sell willingly. She's too attached to the place. Then we need to make her unattached," a third voice said, a man I didn't recognize. There are ways to motivate elderly people to make sensible decisions about their living situations. My heart began to pound as I realized what I was hearing. They were talking about me like I was a problem to be solved, not a person to be loved. "What are you suggesting, Brad?" Kira asked. "I'm suggesting that sometimes people need help seeing that their current situation isn't sustainable," this Brad person continued. "Maybe she starts having problems with the house. Maybe it becomes too expensive to maintain. Maybe she starts feeling unsafe living there alone." "That's pretty vague," Lance said, but he didn't sound disapproving. He sounded interested. "It doesn't have to be anything dramatic," Brad explained. "Just enough to make her realize that she'd be better off somewhere else. Somewhere smaller. Somewhere that doesn't tie up so much capital." "And then what?" Kira asked. "She moves into some retirement home and just hands us the money?" Lance laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. "She's not going to live forever, and when she's gone, everything comes to me anyway. This would just speed up the timeline." "What about those debts of yours?" Brad asked Kira. "How much time do you have before the creditors start getting serious?" "Not much," Kira admitted. "Maybe 6 months if we're lucky. The credit card companies are already threatening legal action. And if Lance's business partner finds out about the money I borrowed from the company account." I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from gasping. She had stolen money from Lance's business? "That's why we need to accelerate the timeline," Lance said. "Mom has to sell that house. If she won't do it voluntarily, we'll have to give her some encouragement." "What kind of encouragement?" Kira asked. There was a long pause, and when Lance spoke again, his voice had taken on a cold, calculating tone I had never heard before. The kind that makes her realize she doesn't have any other choice. I backed away from the gate as quietly as I could, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold on to Emma's birthday presents. I got in my car and drove home in a daze, my mind racing with the implications of what I had just heard. My son, the boy I had raised, loved, sacrificed for, was planning to manipulate me into selling my home. Not because he cared about my well-being, but because he and his wife needed money to pay for their reckless financial decisions. That night, I sat in my kitchen until dawn, trying to process what I had learned. Part of me wanted to confront Lance directly, to ask him how he could even consider treating his own mother this way. But a deeper, wiser part of me knew that confrontation would only put him on guard. If I wanted to protect myself, I needed to be smarter than that. The next morning, I called a security company and had cameras installed throughout my house. Small, discreet cameras that would record everything without being easily noticed. I told the installer that I was concerned about break-ins in the neighborhood, which wasn't entirely a lie. Over the following weeks, I began to notice things. My mail was being tampered with. Envelopes that should have been sealed were slightly open. Magazines were missing. Bills were delivered late. Someone was monitoring my correspondence. Then came the phone calls. Wrong numbers at all hours of the night, heavy breathing on the other end of the line, calls that would hang up the moment I answered. It was psychological warfare, designed to make me feel unsafe and isolated. The real escalation began in November. I came home from grocery shopping to find my back door standing open, even though I knew I had locked it. Nothing was missing, but things had been moved around just enough to let me know someone had been inside. My bedroom had been searched, my papers rifled through, my personal belongings handled by strangers' hands. Each incident was small enough to be dismissed as coincidence or forgetfulness, but together they formed a pattern of intimidation that was impossible to ignore. They were trying to make me feel unsafe in my own home, to convince me that I was becoming too old and vulnerable to live independently. What they didn't know was that every single incident was being recorded by my security system. By December, I had hours of footage showing Lance's car parked outside my house at odd hours, showing him and Kira walking around my property when they thought I wasn't home, showing the mysterious Brad person, who turned out to be Lance's business partner, testing my doors and windows. But the recording that changed everything was from a cold January evening when they thought I was visiting my sister in Florida. I had actually returned a day early, but I hadn't told anyone. The cameras captured Lance and Kira letting themselves into my house with a key I didn't know they had. "This place gives me the creeps," Kira said as they walked through my living room. "It's like a museum. No wonder she's so attached to it. She's living in the past." "Once we get our hands on it, we can gut the whole place," Lance replied. "Brad knows a contractor who can flip it in 3 months. We'll probably clear $600,000 after renovation costs." They spent an hour going through my personal belongings, with Kira making snide comments about my old lady decorations and Lance calculating the resale value of everything I owned. At one point, Kira picked up the framed photo of Robert and me from our wedding day. "Look at this ancient thing," she said, laughing. "Should we keep it for sentimental value, or just throw it out with the rest of the junk?" "Throw it out," Lance said without hesitation. "I want to start fresh when this place is ours. No reminders of the past. That was the moment I knew I had to act. Not because of the threat to my property, but because of the complete erasure of everything Robert and I had built together. They weren't just planning to take my house, they were planning to destroy every trace of the life I had lived. The next day, I began looking for a new place to live. Not because I was giving up, but because I was going on the offensive. I found a lovely 2-bedroom apartment across town, close to the library and a park where I could walk safely. It was smaller than my house, but it was mine, and more importantly, Lance and Kira didn't know about it. I hired professional movers to help me relocate all of my truly valuable possessions: the real family photos, Robert's important papers, my mother's jewelry, anything that had genuine sentimental or monetary value. I did this gradually, over the course of several weeks, making sure to vary my schedule so that Lance and Kira wouldn't notice the pattern. In the house, I left behind furniture that looked valuable, but wasn't. Photographs that were copies of originals I had stored safely, and decorative items that could be replaced. To a casual observer, especially one who was planning to destroy everything anyway, it would look like I was still living there normally. I also upgraded my security system, installing cameras that would transmit footage directly to a cloud storage service that Lance and Kira couldn't access even if they found and destroyed the physical recording devices. By February, I was fully established in my new apartment, though I continued to visit the house regularly to maintain the illusion that I still lived there. I was ready for whatever they might try next. I didn't have to wait long. The escalation came in early March, right after their ultimatum about the $200,000. When I refused to sell immediately, I could see the desperation in their eyes. They were running out of time, and desperate people do desperate things. I had been tracking their movements for weeks, and I could see the pattern forming. Brad had been recruiting some men, day laborers who needed cash and weren't too concerned about the legality of their work. Lance had been buying supplies, including several baseball bats that he charged to a credit card I wasn't supposed to know about. They were planning something big, something that would force my hand once and for all. So on that Tuesday morning when I told Dr. Martinez's office that I would be in for my appointment, I made sure that Lance and Kira knew about it. I called Lance and left a voicemail, mentioning casually that I would be out of the house for most of the day, that I had a doctor's appointment and then planned to run some errands. I wanted them to think they had the perfect opportunity. What they didn't know was that I had installed additional cameras the night before. Cameras that would capture everything from multiple angles. I had also contacted a private investigator, a retired police officer named Detective Morris who specialized in documenting domestic crimes. When I left for my appointment that morning, Detective Morris was already in position across the street, with professional video equipment that would record everything in high definition. I knew what they were planning to do to my house. I had been counting on it. Because sometimes, when you want to catch someone in the act, you have to give them the perfect opportunity to reveal who they really are. The police arrived faster than I expected. Officer Martinez was the first through my broken door, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the demeanor of someone who had seen too much human cruelty to be easily shocked. Behind her came Officer Johnson, younger and clearly disturbed by the level of destruction he was witnessing. "Ma'am, are you injured?" Officer Martinez asked, her eyes scanning me for signs of trauma. "No, I'm fine," I replied, my voice steady. "I wasn't here when this happened. I was at a doctor's appointment." Officer Johnson was already taking photographs of the damage, moving systematically through each room. "This is extensive," he said, shaking his head. "Whoever did this wasn't just robbing you. They wanted to hurt you." "Yes," I agreed. "They did." Officer Martinez pulled out her notepad. "Do you have any idea who might have done this? Any enemies? Anyone who might have a grudge against you?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment I had been preparing for, but it still felt surreal to be saying the words out loud. "It was my son, Lance Holloway, and at least 3 other men. My neighbors saw them." Both officers exchanged glances. Cases involving family members always complicated things. "Ma'am, that's a serious accusation," Officer Martinez said gently. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm completely sure," I replied. "And I have proof." I led them to the small closet under the stairs where I had hidden the main recording device for my security system. The cameras throughout the house had been destroyed, as I knew they would be, but the central unit was hidden behind a false panel that Lance had never known about. "This system has been recording everything that happens in this house for the past 6 months, I explained as I retrieved the device. "It also uploads automatically to a cloud storage service. So even if this unit had been destroyed, the footage would still exist." Officer Johnson's eyebrows rose. "You've been recording for 6 months? Why?" "Because I knew this was coming." Over the next hour, I showed them everything. The footage of Lance and Kira entering my house without permission in January. The recordings of Brad and his associates surveying my property. The audio of conversations where they discussed how to motivate me to sell my house. The systematic harassment campaign that had been building for months. But the piece de resistance was the footage from that morning, captured by Detective Morris from his position across the street. High-definition video of Lance directing 3 men with baseball bats as they systematically destroyed my home. Clear audio of him saying, "Make sure you get everything. I want her to know she has no choice now." Officer Martinez watched the footage with growing amazement. "Mrs. Holloway, this is one of the most well-documented cases of domestic vandalism I've ever seen. Your son and his associates committed multiple felonies, and we have it all on tape." "There's more," I said quietly. I pulled out a thick folder I had been keeping in my purse. Financial records showing that Kira Holloway embezzled over $75,000 from my son's business. Bank statements proving that they've been forging my name on credit card applications. Phone records documenting hundreds of harassing calls to my number over the past 4 months. Officer Johnson stared at the documents. "How did you get all of this?" "I hired a private investigator 3 months ago," I explained. "Detective Morris. He's the one who filmed today's incident. When you suspect someone is planning to commit crimes against you, it's wise to gather evidence." The 2 officers stepped outside to call for backup. Through my broken window, I could see them talking on their radios, their expressions serious. When they came back inside, Officer Martinez was carrying a tablet. "Mrs. Holloway, we've run the names you gave us through our system. Lance Holloway has an outstanding warrant for failure to appear in court on a previous assault charge. Kira Holloway is wanted for questioning in connection with credit card fraud in 2 other counties. And this Brad Malloy person has a record going back 15 years. Assault, theft, conspiracy." I wasn't surprised. People who would destroy an elderly woman's home for money weren't likely to be first-time offenders. "We're going to need you to come to the station to give a formal statement," Officer Martinez continued. "And we'll need copies of all this evidence. How soon can Detective Morris get us his footage from today?" "He should be here any minute," I said. "I texted him when you arrived." As if on cue, there was a knock at my broken door. Detective Morris entered carrying a professional camera and a briefcase full of equipment. He was a tall, lean man in his 60s with silver hair and the sharp eyes of someone who had spent 30 years catching criminals. "Officers," he said, nodding to Martinez and Johnson. "I assume Mrs. Holloway has filled you in on what we've been documenting?" "She has," Officer Martinez replied. "We'll need copies of everything you recorded today." Detective Morris opened his briefcase and pulled out a laptop. "I can transfer the files to you right now. Fair warning, it's pretty damning footage. These people destroyed this woman's home like they were conducting a military operation." While Detective Morris worked with the officers to transfer the video files, I walked through my destroyed house one more time. But now, instead of seeing the ruins of my life, I saw something else entirely. I saw justice. Every broken dish, every slashed piece of furniture, every hole punched in the wall was evidence of who Lance and Kira really were. They had revealed themselves completely, and now there was no going back. My phone rang. It was Lance. I looked at Officer Martinez, who nodded encouragingly. "Answer it," she whispered. "Put it on speaker." "Hello, Lance," I said calmly. "Mom, I just heard that the police were at your house. Are you okay? What happened?" His voice was full of fake concern, the performance of a loving son worried about his mother. "Someone broke into my house today and destroyed everything," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Oh my God, that's terrible. Do they know who did it? Did you see them?" Officer Martinez was recording the call on her phone, capturing Lance's lies in real time. "Actually, the neighbors saw everything," I said. "They identified you, Lance. They saw you and 3 other men with baseball bats." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Lance spoke again, his voice had changed completely. The fake concern was gone, replaced by barely controlled rage. "You called the cops on me? Your own son? You destroyed my home," I replied simply. "I was trying to help you. You're too old to live in that house by yourself. This was for your own good. $50,000 in damage was for my own good?" "You know what, Mom? Maybe now you'll listen to reason. Maybe now you'll do what's right for the family instead of being so goddamn selfish all the time." Officer Martinez made a gesture for me to keep him talking. "What do you want me to do, Lance?" "You know exactly what you need to do. Sell the house. Give us the money. Stop being so stubborn about everything. And if I don't?" Lance's voice dropped to something cold and threatening. "Then what happened today will look like a picnic compared to what comes next. I know where you live, Mom. I know your routines. I know how to make your life very, very difficult. Is that a threat, Lance? It's a promise." Officer Martinez ended the recording and looked at me with something like admiration. "Mrs. Holloway, your son just confessed to felony vandalism and threatened you with future violence, all while we were recording. I've been doing this job for 20 years. And I've never seen anyone hand us a case this neatly wrapped." Detective Morris closed his laptop with a satisfied smile. "The footage I captured today shows clear premeditation. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated attack designed to terrorize an elderly woman into compliance. Any prosecutor would love to have a case this solid. What happens now?" I asked. "Now we arrest them," Officer Martinez said. "All of them. And based on the evidence you've provided, they're looking at serious prison time." She spoke into her radio again, and I heard her requesting multiple units for coordinated arrests. Within minutes, my quiet street was filled with police cars, their red and blue lights reflecting off the windows of my destroyed home. But for me, those lights didn't represent chaos or tragedy. They represented something I had been waiting 5 years to see: accountability. As I watched the officers coordinate their arrests, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Not satisfaction exactly, and not revenge. It was something deeper and more profound than either of those emotions. It was the feeling of taking my power back. Lance and Kira had spent years systematically destroying my place in the family, erasing me from important moments, treating me like an inconvenience to be managed. They had assumed that because I was older, because I was alone, because I had been conditioned to accept their treatment, I would continue to be their victim forever. They had made the mistake of confusing kindness with weakness, silence with stupidity, and patience with helplessness. Tonight, they would learn the difference. Officer Martinez handed me her card. "Mrs. Holloway, we'll need you to come in tomorrow morning to sign your formal statement. After that, this case will move through the system pretty quickly, given the strength of the evidence." "How quickly?" I asked. "With this much documentation? I'd expect arrests within the next few hours, arraignment by tomorrow afternoon. And honestly, with video evidence this clear, I don't think they'll be making bail." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace settling over me. "Thank you, Officer Martinez. Thank you for believing me." She smiled. "Mrs. Holloway, after what you've shown us today, believing you was the easy part. The hard part will be explaining to your son that actions have consequences." As the police finished collecting evidence and preparing to leave, I took one last look around my destroyed house. Tomorrow, insurance adjusters would come to assess the damage. Contractors would give estimates for repairs. Real estate agents would help me decide whether to rebuild or sell. But tonight, I had something more important to do. I had to go home to my real home, my quiet apartment across town where my actual treasures were safely stored, and begin the next chapter of my life. A chapter where I was no longer anyone's victim. 8 months later, I sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. In my hands was a letter I had been expecting but dreading. Correspondence from the state correctional facility where Lance was serving his sentence. I set it aside, unopened. Some conversations were over, whether the other person realized it or not. The trials had been swift and decisive. Lance received 2 years for felony vandalism, criminal conspiracy, and elder abuse. The assault charge from his outstanding warrant added another 6 months. Kira got 18 months for embezzlement and fraud, but because she was in the country illegally, she would be deported immediately upon release. Brad and his associates received various sentences ranging from 6 months to a year. But for me, the real victory hadn't been watching them led away in handcuffs, though I won't lie, there had been satisfaction in that moment. The real victory had been quieter, more personal. It was the discovery that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. The insurance settlement for the house had been generous, $75,000, more than enough to cover the actual damage and leave me with money left over. I had decided not to repair the house. Instead, I sold it as is to a young couple who saw potential in the solid bones beneath the destruction. They were excited about the renovation project, about making it their own. It felt right, letting someone else bring new life to that space. My apartment had become more than just a place to live. It had become a sanctuary. Every morning, I woke up without dread, without wondering what fresh manipulation or cruelty the day might bring. For the first time in years, my life was entirely my own. I had also discovered something unexpected. I wasn't as alone as I had thought. The day after Lance's arrest, Mrs. Henderson had knocked on my door with a casserole and an apology. "Rosalind, I should have done something sooner. We all should have. We knew something wasn't right with how that boy was treating you." That conversation led to others. I learned that several neighbors had witnessed Lance's intimidation tactics over the months, but hadn't known how to intervene. Some had wanted to call the police during previous incidents, but worried about inserting themselves into family business. "Next time," Mrs. Henderson said firmly, "family business doesn't excuse criminal behavior. We should have protected you better." Through her, I met other women in the neighborhood who had dealt with similar situations. Adult children who saw their aging parents as obstacles rather than people deserving of love and respect. We started meeting for coffee once a week, sharing stories and strategies, building the support system that none of us had realized we needed. I also reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with during the years when Lance and Kira controlled my social calendar. My high school friend Patricia, who lived just 2 towns over. My former neighbor Ellen, who had moved to a retirement community but was only 30 minutes away. My sister Margaret in Florida, who admitted she had always thought something was wrong with Lance, but hadn't known how to bring it up. For the first time in decades, my phone rang with invitations instead of demands. People wanted to see me, spend time with me, share meals and conversations and laughter with me. I had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted rather than needed, appreciated rather than used. The most surprising relationship that developed was with Emma and Jake, my grandchildren. 3 months after the trials, I received a call from Emma's school counselor. Lance had listed me as an emergency contact years ago and forgotten to remove my name. Emma had been having behavioral problems, acting out in class, fighting with other children, struggling with her schoolwork. "Mrs. Holloway," the counselor said, "Emma talks about you sometimes. She says you used to buy her art supplies and books. She seems to have very fond memories of you, but she's confused about why you don't visit anymore." That conversation led to a careful negotiation with Child Services and the foster family where Emma and Jake had been placed after their parents' incarceration. I was allowed supervised visits, then gradually unsupervised time with them on weekends. The children were angry and confused at first, as any child would be when their world falls apart. But slowly, as we spent time together, they began to open up. Emma admitted that she had missed me, that she had never understood why her parents said I didn't want to see her anymore. Jake, who was only 6, mostly just wanted someone to read to him and help him with puzzles. I didn't try to poison them against their parents. Children love their parents even when those parents make terrible choices, and I respected that. But I also didn't lie to them when they asked direct questions about what had happened. "Your parents made some bad decisions," I told them simply. "Sometimes adults do things that hurt other people, and when that happens, there are consequences. But that doesn't mean they don't love you, and it doesn't mean you did anything wrong." Emma, who was wise beyond her 9 years, asked the question I had been dreading. "Is it true that Daddy hurt your house?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, sweetheart, he did." "Why?" "Because he wanted something from me, and when I said no, he got angry and tried to force me to change my mind." Emma was quiet for a long time, processing this information. Finally, she said, "That's not how you're supposed to treat people you love." "No," I agreed. "It's not." These conversations were difficult, but they were also healing, for both the children and for me. Emma and Jake needed stability and unconditional love from an adult who wouldn't abandon them or use them as weapons in someone else's war. And I needed to remember what it felt like to matter to someone who wasn't trying to take anything from me. The foster family, the Richardsons, were kind people who understood the importance of maintaining family connections when possible. They supported my relationship with the children and even invited me to join them for holidays and school events. It wasn't the family I had planned for, but it was real and healthy and built on respect rather than obligation. On Emma's 10th birthday, I was there when she blew out her candles. The photo the Richardsons took that day showed something I hadn't seen in years, a genuine smile on my granddaughter's face and peace in my own eyes. As autumn turned to winter, I finally felt ready to make some decisions about my future. I had been living day by day for so long, just surviving, that I had forgotten I could also plan and dream and hope. I enrolled in a watercolor painting class at the community center, something I had always wanted to try but never made time for. I joined a book club at the library. I started volunteering at a local literacy program, helping adults learn to read. Each activity brought new people into my life, new friendships based on shared interests rather than shared DNA. I also began traveling, something Robert and I had always planned to do but never quite managed before his death. Small trips at first, a weekend in the mountains, a visit to Patricia in her charming coastal town, a week with Margaret in Florida. Each journey reminded me that the world was bigger than my small circle of pain, full of beauty and kindness and possibilities I had almost forgotten existed. The letter from Lance remained on my coffee table for 3 days before I finally opened it. It was shorter than I expected. "Mom, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know I'm sorry. Not just because I got caught, but because I hurt you. I don't know when I stopped seeing you as my mother and started seeing you as an obstacle. Maybe it was when Kira came into the picture. Maybe it was before that. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I remember being a little kid and feeling safe with you. I remember you teaching me piano and helping me with my homework and being proud of me when I did something good. I don't know how I forgot that person you were, or how I forgot the person I used to be when I was with you. I'm not asking you to forgive me or write back or visit me. I just wanted you to know that the kid who loved you is still in here somewhere, even if the man I became forgot how to show it. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in my jewelry box next to Robert's wedding ring and my mother's pearls. Not because I was ready to forgive, but because it was an ending of sorts, a closing of a circle that had been left open too long. Lance was right about one thing. Saying sorry didn't fix anything, but it was a start, the first honest thing he had said to me in years. Whether it would lead to anything more remained to be seen. I had learned not to hope for things that were outside my control. What I could control was how I spent the time I had left, and I was determined to spend it well. On a bright spring morning, exactly 1 year after the destruction of my house, I sat in my garden, a small plot I had rented at the community garden center, planting tomatoes and herbs and flowers. My hands were dirty with good, rich soil, and the sun was warm on my face. Mrs. Henderson found me there, as she often did on Saturday mornings. We had developed a routine of gardening together, then sharing coffee and solving the world's problems from our folding chairs between the vegetable rows. "You look content," she observed, settling into her chair with a satisfied sigh. "I am," I replied, and realized with some surprise that it was completely true. For 62 years, I had defined myself by my relationships with other people. First as a daughter, then as a wife, then as a mother. I had derived my worth from how well I served others, how successfully I anticipated their needs, how completely I sacrificed my own wants for their happiness. But in the last year, I had discovered something revolutionary. I was enough all by myself. My value didn't depend on whether Lance acknowledged me, or whether Kira approved of me, or whether anyone else understood the choices I made. I was enough because I chose to be kind without being a doormat. I was enough because I had survived and thrived despite people who tried to destroy me. I was enough because I had learned to love myself with the same fierce protectiveness I had once reserved for others. As I sat in my garden that morning, surrounded by new growth and fresh possibilities, I felt something I had never experienced before: complete freedom. Not freedom from responsibility or connection, but freedom from the need to earn love through suffering, to prove worth through sacrifice, to exist only in service to others. I was finally, fully, joyfully free to be exactly who I was meant to be. And that person, I had discovered, was pretty remarkable after all. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.